Hi Learning Theories and Application students. We're going to look at motivation and self-regulation in learning. I'm going to give you a general overview of the theoretical constructs in this chapter, and then that might help set you up with an advanced organizer for reading and making sense of the chapter. Okay, who said advanced organizer? Who used that in their theory? Right, Isabel, okay. Another way we can look at advanced organizer, we can also talk about it as prior knowledge. And who referred to prior knowledge in their theory? Number of people. Isabel, Brunner, information processing theorists, right? Okay, so let's take a look at some of the major constructs. All right, motivation. First of all, let's define it. Motivation is a process by which goal-directed behavior is instigated and sustained. That means that in order for motivation to need to be activated, we have to have some goal, something we're trying to obtain, and we have that motivation the motivation is what allows us to get this goal accomplished. It tends to be a work-related rather than a play-related concept, because motivation to play, we just don't need to worry about that so much because it's pretty much inherent. That's why we engage in play, because it's fun, right? Motivation is important to the study of learning, even though it's not a learning theory. If we don't have people being motivated to learn, they're not likely to learn, and therefore we can't study and understand learning. And motivation can be either intrinsic or extrinsic. Intrinsic means it comes from within the learner, and extrinsic means it comes from outside of the learner. Some learners are just very, very internally motivated. There are things that they want to accomplish, there are reasons they want to do particular things, and they engage in motivation purely out of intrinsic reasons. Others are looking for external rewards, and so they are motivated to get those external rewards. All right, so let's an intrinsic reward might be that I just want to learn something. I'm very motivated to learn. I want to understand this better. And an extrinsic reward might be I want to get a good grade, or I want to keep my grades up to get a scholarship. All right, let's look at some origins and determinants of motivation. The drive theorists were some early motivational theorists, and they said that motivation was all based on physiological needs, that we did things in order to satisfy maybe our need to eat or our need to rest, but something related to physiology. When the cognitive theorists said, you know what, this doesn't fully explain motivation. There are other things that motivate us. There are other things that drive us to do particular things, and we need to look at these other sources of motivation. One thing that can keep us motivated is curiosity and interest. And if you guys have ever tried to do something fun or interesting or unique in your classroom, you'll see that curiosity and interest can be strong motivators. Part of the reason I've found some of these YouTube videos for you to watch, not the ones I'm creating, but some of the ones that other people have created, is because I've found some that are just funny or some that are very informative that might help you to be interested and therefore more motivated to learn. I recognize that the instructional videos are not necessarily as exciting as some of the other videos, but I'm not a comedian, and I am funnier in person. Not that you'd ever know that. So anyway, take my word for it. All right, goals and goal orientation can also be important to motivation. If we have a goal, it will help us to accomplish our task better. And there's a number of different types of goals we can look at. There's the notion of explicit goals versus general goals. In other words, sometimes people say, I'm going to read my textbook for a while. It's kind of a general goal, isn't it? If somebody says, I'm going to read 5 pages, then take a 5-minute break, and then read 5 more pages, that's a very explicit and specific goal. Which one's more likely to be motivating? That one about the 5 pages in 5 minutes, right? We're likely to get a lot more done. We can also set proximal or distal goals, which we can also sort of think of as short-term versus long-term goals. And those short-term goals might be that 5 pages versus I'm going to read the chapter. And again, which is more motivating? When we set the short-term goals that lead to long-term goals, we tend to have more motivation. And the final type of goal that we want to look at is performance versus mastery goals. And we have some people who are motivated because they want to look good in front of other people. That's a performance goal. A mastery goal leads to motivation and learning because we want to acquire more knowledge, or we want to learn more, or we really are interested in the subject. And we tend to find that people with mastery goals are more motivated than those with performance goals, because the performance goals require the approval of others, and the mastery goals, when met, create an internal satisfaction that motivates us to want to continue to do more. Another source of motivation is self-efficacy beliefs. What is self-efficacy? Self-efficacy is a learner's belief about themselves in relation to their task, difficulty, and the outcome. A learner's belief about themselves related to the task difficulty and the outcome. So we talk about self-efficacy as something that says, how well do I think I'll perform this thing? How hard is it? How well do I think I'll do on this? And there's 4 sources of self-efficacy. And I want you to think about these sources, and I want you to think about what we just said about the task and the difficulty, because if something's very, very difficult, we really need to have a lot of motivation in order to get it done. And if something's easy, we don't need as much motivation to get it done. And our self-efficacy comes into play here. Okay. 4 sources of self-efficacy beliefs. The first one is called enactive mastery experiences, or it's also called performance expectations. And that is when we have done something and we've been successful, then we have higher self-efficacy for the next time that we might engage in that behavior. And I'll give you an example of that. When my daughter was 5, she wanted me to make her a Belle dress. Remember Belle from Beauty and the Beast? Well, I had sewn very, very basic costumes prior to that. I'd made a tutu out of tulle. I used to sew when I was younger, but I hadn't sewn for her. So I decided to make this Belle dress, and I got this yellow satin fabric and made all these flounces, and she had this beautiful little Belle dress. And one of my friends saw it. Anyway, so I made this beautiful little Belle dress, and I thought, if I did that, I bet I can sew other things for her. And so I started sewing a lot of her dresses for her for school for the next 5 or 6 years. Maybe 4 or 5 years. And I felt better about doing that and was more motivated because I had already experienced success in making the Belle dress. Another source of self-efficacy beliefs is vicarious experiences, and vicarious experiences has to do with seeing other people accomplish something, and we think, hey, wait, if they can do it, so can I. I was in Rome with my daughter and Florence and a number of other places with my daughter a couple months ago for a class trip. And when we were in Florence, she wanted to climb the steps of the Duomo. The Duomo means, I can't even remember what it means in Italian, but there's a big dome on top of the church, and it's just informally referred to as the Duomo, and we wanted to climb that. And when we started going up these steps, which were very narrow and claustrophobic and very steep, I thought, I don't know if I can do this. I'm too old. I don't know if I want to do this. And then I was watching all these other people go ahead of me, and I thought, well, you know what? If they can do it, so can I. And then my competitive factor set in, and I decided that I would keep climbing. It was very motivating for me. A third source of self-efficacy beliefs is verbal persuasion. Verbal persuasion is just, you can do this, you can do it. It's people talking you into it. All right, so an example of verbal persuasion might be, I made a pie a number of years ago, and a friend of mine came over and she said, where'd you get your pie crust? It's good. And I said, I made my pie crust. And she said, I didn't know you could do pie crust. I said, well, you can make a pie crust. You bake cakes. After that, she started making her own pie crust. The verbal persuasion increased her self-efficacy. And the final source of self-efficacy beliefs is physiological states. And these are just sort of our gut feelings. Sometimes we have this gut feeling we can do something, and other times we have a gut feeling that we absolutely cannot do it. And I remember going skiing with my parents. My dad and mom took me snow skiing in Colorado when I was in college, and I had been to North Carolina, and the slopes are a lot steeper in Colorado, and I got up on the top of the slope, and I looked down, and that slope looked to be about 10 feet wide, and it looked like it was this almost a straight down drop, and I stood there at the top of that mountain and said, I can't do this, I'm too scared, I'm going to wreck, I'm going to go off the edge of the mountain, I'm going to die. And my dad stood next to me and he said, you can do it, you can do it. And eventually I did do it, and I didn't go back up on that slope again. So the verbal persuasion from my dad was what allowed me to get over the physiological state of fear and helped me to go down that mountain. But I didn't go back to that slope. I did go to a few other ones, though. So in the classroom, an active mastery experience might be allowing a student to experience real success with a particular content area. If a child is a pretty good reader, they might feel confident in their ability to read a little more challenging book. Vicarious experiences, if kids identify with other kids and they say, oh, wait, that child over there is getting their math done. I think I could sit and do my math now, rather than goof off. That's a vicarious experience. Verbal persuasion, the teacher saying, come on, let's give it a try, let's just start, let's try this. That might help increase self-efficacy. And then physiological states, just decreasing anxiety can help motivate and increase self-efficacy. How do we continue motivation? Well, there's a couple of ways. One is through satisfying expectancies. This means, and there's 2 different types of expectancies, as outcome expectancy and efficacy expectancy or expectation. And if I have an expectancy or an expectation of success, and there's something that I want to do and I believe I can do this, then I'm going to be more motivated. When I was, another trip my parents took us on when I was in college, they took us down to the Keys to go scuba diving and snorkeling and swimming and all the different things you can do in the Keys. And I very much wanted to be able to get in the water and go scuba diving. And because I wanted to do that, I was motivated to go through a scuba course. That was the outcome expectation. And once I actually was able to successfully complete my final dive, which was in a very dark lake, and it was very frightening, and my brother was with me, and he was the one that kind of talked me through that. Once I actually was able to complete my final test dive, then I thought, oh good, I'm ready to go, I can scuba dive. And I knew the water where we were going would be much more clear than where we had done the test dive, and so I felt confident that I would be able to scuba dive on the trip. Okay? We also can be motivated by the natural consequences of learning. What I was excited to be able to use my scuba diving, and because I was going on this trip, and that was a natural consequence of learning, was being able to get in the beautiful water and to use my scuba equipment. That motivated me to keep working. Okay? Sometimes there are no clear natural consequences of learning, and so we have to try to instill positive consequences for learners. So there may be times that a task is just boring and people don't want to do it, and so you give them some positive consequence to keep them going. When my son was younger, he had pretty severe articulation disorder. There were a lot of sounds he couldn't pronounce, and he had to do speech therapy with a therapist twice a week. But because I was a former speech therapist, I also worked with him at home, and I would require him to practice every day, and it was just boring to practice every day. So I told him if he would practice for 10 minutes with Mommy every day, then at the end of the week we could go get a Star Wars toy. And because that task was so boring, and because it was hard to use those muscles in new ways, I knew I had to offer him positive consequences. And so he got quite a collection of Star Wars toys, and he also learned to pronounce all his sounds properly, except for R's. The AR sound in particular, like in car, that was one that he had to work on a little longer, was a little bit harder, and kind of a funny story with that. R's are your last developing sounds anyway, so he had most of his sounds by first grade. In third grade, he had to go back through speech therapy to pick up his R's, and he got the OR like in for, and the IR like in bird, and the ER like in rooster. He got all of those, but he could not get that AR. And being a fourth grade boy, he thought it was funny to say the word fart, except he said fought. And I said, Gunther, you're not allowed to say fought. And he said, why not? And I said, it's an ugly word. And then another day he said fought again, and I started thinking about it. And I said, I'll tell you what, Gunther, I'll make a deal with you. You can say fart as much as you want, as long as you say fart and not fought. And so my child walked around the house saying fart, 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 and that's how he got his ARs. So there you go. Whatever works, right? Okay. And that became a natural consequence of learning for him as he enjoyed saying it, but I gave him the positive consequence of, if you can say it right, you can say it, and that motivated him to practice. We also can continue motivation through our attributions, and an attribution is just a reason that we give for why we are successful or why we fail at something. And you've all heard people say, well, I didn't do very well because I didn't really care about this, or I did well because I worked hard. Those are both attributions, and all attributions have 3 different dimensions. They can either be internal or external. Internal is when we attribute the cause of our success to something within us, and external is when we attribute the cause of our success to something outside of us. Stable is something that we perceive as relatively stable or steady over time, and unstable is something that we think can be changed or might change over time. And then we can also have a controllable versus an uncontrollable attribution. Controllable is something that we perceive that we have control over, versus uncontrollable, where we feel like we can't do anything about it. And there's a number of different examples of attributions in your text that vary on these 3 different dimensions on page 326, and so you might want to take a look at those to understand some examples of attributions. Self-regulation is another important factor in motivation, and self-regulation has 3 major components. When we talk about self-regulation, we have to consider, first of all, forethought or planning. And let me back up for just a minute. Self-regulation has to do with setting goals for ourselves and then attempting to accomplish those goals and motivating ourselves to accomplish those goals. So the first thing we have to do in self-regulation is to have some forethought or a plan for completing our goal. Also, if we're going to self-regulate, we have to manage our learning by a variety of strategies. We have to figure out how are we going to do this? How are we going to accomplish this task? And there might be a variety of strategies to do so. And the third source of self-regulation, or the third process, is monitoring our progress to our goal attainment. Let me give you an example of this. My son, who's 14, and doesn't say fought anymore, but says fart, wants to work out, and he wants to be very muscular. In fact, he is very well defined, but he's a thin 14-year-old boy with a great metabolism, so he's not very bulky. He would like to be bulky, probably not going to get there. But anyway, he wanted to work out and be well defined. So he had to start figuring out how he was going to do this and how he was going to motivate himself to become very well defined. Well, he was partly motivated just because he wanted to be that way, but he knew he would have to make some steps toward making sure that he worked out on a regular basis. He would have to self-regulate his behavior to actually meet his goal. So he started planning out what he could do to work out, and he started thinking about where he would like to go, how often he would like to work out, and then he started managing his workout schedule through a variety of strategies. He read about working out. He started asking for workout equipment for birthdays and Christmas. He knew that he'd have to get homework done before he could go and work out. He knew that there would be some days sports practice would keep him from working out, so he had to figure out which days he could work out. And then since that time, he's been monitoring his progress toward his goal attainment. He will come home from the gym and say, I bench pressed this today, or I did this many squats today, and he'll tell me what he's doing, and he has this goal in his mind, and he's working toward that, and he's monitoring his progress and increasing his abilities as he goes. Okay? How do we develop self-regulation in learners? We can coach learners on effective strategies, and we can also help them to develop new competencies, and both of those will help promote self-regulation. The last topic in your text is the ARCS model of motivational design, so please take a look at that and make sure that you are able to recognize and generate examples of ARC and S, because that will be your discussion posting for this week.